So just on a little bit of a mushroom hunt. We're into that time of year where a lot of the tastier mushrooms start to come out. So I'll just kind of do a little bit of a snoop around and see if I come across anything worth looking at. If I find a couple chanterelles, I'll let you know and put it in the video. There's one of the first half decent sized chanterelles I've seen. A lot of them are still pretty small. I'll just cut it out now and show it to you. So when you're harvesting the mushrooms, you never want to just rip them out. If you can, just cut them with your knife and leave the base of the root, if you will, just so it'll grow back next year. So it's not the prettiest chanterelle in the world, but a tasty nibble nonetheless. So I'll end up cleaning that up a little later on and throwing that on the fire, have with a steak. You can see it's got this kind of orange color to it, and underside has that kind of look. Most of the mushrooms in this area that have this kind of look are edible mushrooms, and as you can see, half decent size compared to my hand. Here's a couple more chanterelles, just little teeny ones. You can see something's already gotten to that one. And this one looks half decent, but still just small. It's very early in the season. So I'll just harvest that off as well and add it to the pot. And yet again, another little one I've just come across. Oh, these are really small mushrooms. I've seen a few of them that I haven't harvested and some that I have. You know, it's it all depends on the look of them, but either way, it's still a fairly early in the season for chanterelles and that. And they seem to have come out a little later than they normally would at this time of year. But either way, I'll gather up a couple more if I come across them, and I'll show you the end result when I get my pile together. And as I've shown in previous videos, there's lots of slugs that exist in this area. You know, for a survival situation, if you had to, chanterelles and snails and slugs are half decent to kind of gather up together. But this is the competition. I do believe these little buggers are eating up the chanterelles as fast as they're growing out of the ground too. So, you know, it's a race of me versus them. Well, here's another mushroom that potentially has some tasty edibles in it. Now I'll harvest this out. I'm looking to see if the stem is like a reddy color. If it is, this is edible, and if it isn't, I will leave it be. So I'll just turn the camera off and show you after I've harvested it one way or the other. Alright, so it is what I thought it was. I call them zealous mushrooms because the scientific name is just blah, but these are a tasty nibble for sure. I'll show you the underside. And you see how they've got kind of a red stalk to them, but they don't have any, you know, gills per se. It's just kind of porous, if you will. These are really hard to find though. When you I'll just set it down. When you see how it sits on the forest floor, you know, the dark colored tops of them compared to the forest, they just really camo in really well. So it's very difficult for me to normally come across these, but they're super tasty. So I'll harvest this as well. What size is that beast? One of the bigger ones I've seen of those. Leave that be. It's obviously not edible or anything, but you use the unit bits for fire starter aid and that kind of stuff, but just not used to seeing ones that big. It's a fairly substantial size. Nice little cubby here. Imagine some creature camps out in there every now and again. I think I've come across a king bullet here. So these are a substantial size mushroom. They can grow to be really enormous. So that one's in really good shape, so I'll just leave it be. And I'll show you kind of a version over here. There's a couple of them hidden in under the dirt there, and these ones have been chewed really bad, so they look poor, but just to show you the size of these things. Let's see if I can, this one's going either way. But to give you an idea, that's a massive mushroom. Easily a meal when it's, you know, I wouldn't eat this because it's in terrible shape and the animals have gotten to it. But to give you an idea, the porous underside normally got a darker brown color on the top when they're, you know, in full life, if you will. But even the stems of them, the stalks, if you will, are fairly substantial in size. Of definitely a large mushroom. and it is edible. They're not the best tasting in the world, but like I say, you can see a couple more hidden out in here, where when you see it in the size of my hand, they're a large mushroom. And here, I'll look at this one, see if I can just adjust that. You can see the size of the stalk or stem on it. It gets fairly large in size, and even that one's been chewed away at by the bugs a bit. But you know, for survival situations, these mushrooms can easily help compensate to make a meal. They're just not the tastiest in the world. And here you can see there's a couple of them growing. You know, with this area seems to have a half decent amount of them growing right in this region, but they're just a massive mushroom, and they've got a good weight to them and everything else. I prefer tastier mushrooms, and these ones aren't really high rated for taste. They're just more for size and volume than anything. But if you're in a survival situation, you know, some sort of emergency, these things will help get you through the day. Like I say, these are all kind of gone to rot now, because they normally come out a little earlier in the year. But definitely top tier survival food for volume, if you will. Okay, so I didn't manage to harvest huge piles. The chanterelles are fairly thin this year in this area. Normally this is a fairly productive zone, so there's other areas I might go into later in the season. You know, maybe the next time I go out I'll move over into another area I know is fairly prime for that kind of stuff. But as you can see, I managed to get, like I said, I can't remember the exact name of these. I call them Zealous Mushrooms just because the Zealarius or something, blah blah blah, some scientific name, I can't remember, you know, Latin, yay. But even the chanterelles, a lot of them were small. There's been heavy rains in the area. The only, you know, half decent sized one really was this one, which was, you know, more of a couple bitefuls, if you will. But I just threw them on a leaf so you guys could see them, you know, standing out. So I'll just end up throwing these into the bush pot, and just so they don't get smushed up and that kind of stuff. I'll clean them up later on and probably just roast them on the fire and just have them with my steak. And so just gotta throw my bag up. I've shown this many times in previous videos. I've got a 6 to 8 foot length of rope. I tend to have a pile of these in my bags, or in my bag at all times, if you will. So it's got a loop on the one end. Just wrap it around the tree. I feed the tag end through the loop, and that way I'm cinched onto the tree okay. I'm just going to find a piece of stick. It seems fairly strong. This will do. I'm going to form a Marlin spike hitch. Put the stick into it, set it on. Now that stick acts as a toggle onto the tree. I take the handle on the top of my bag, and I just want to feed that stick through. And that way it holds the bag up off the ground, so any moisture that's on the forest floor isn't going to seep into the underside of my bag, and it allows it to be far easier for me to get at the stuff when it's right up to chest high. I can get into my bag easier. So there's a dead fallen tree right in the area that I'm in. I've camped out in this location before, so this is familiar terrain to me, and if you've got a keen eye, you've seen this area in previous videos. But I'm gonna just harvest off 3, 6, maybe 7 foot lengths of these sticks just to whip together a tripod for the camera. I've shown that lots in previous videos, but so I won't go into the full details of kind of cleaning up these sticks and all that kind of stuff, you know, the poles, if you will. Okay, so I've harvested off the 3 sticks. Say, they're not, structurally speaking, they're not super strong or anything, they don't need to be. And then I've got a 28-inch length of cordage where I've tied it into a fisherman's knot so it forms a loop. I'm going to double it up on itself, and then I'm just going to feed it over top, set it in about maybe 5-6 inches or so, and then I'm just going to take the middle stick, just kind of separate them all a bit, take the middle stick and start to just wind it, where I'll just start to rotate it. It'll hook onto the loop and just start to tighten it up. I want to keep doing that. I'll step back a bit. Keep doing that with the middle stick until it starts to become tight. So just wind it, and whatever the diameter is of the sticks will determine how many times you can wind up that middle stick before it starts to just become too tight. These branches were fairly small, so it allowed me to wind it a couple times. Like I say, nothing super fancy, doesn't need to be. I just need a tripod to get my camera up. My camera itself has a small little tripod on it, you know, one of those gorilla tripods or whatever. But I just use that to fashion onto the top of this tripod, and that way I can get the camera up, and it allows me to kind of film at eye height, which I think is far better for the videos. So those who haven't watched previous videos, this may be new to you, but for the ones that have, it's old hat. But there's a close-up of kind of that loop and how it's just tightened up to itself. And like I say, these sticks aren't even the straightest. Normally, if I was doing a tripod where I was hanging the grill on and that kind of thing, I'd want those sticks to be, you know, straight, stout sticks, if you will. But they don't need to be for the camera. The camera only weighs a couple ounces. And really, I'll just take the tripod on the camera and kind of hook it onto this top piece, and that way my camera gets up. But it's definitely a rapid way of throwing together tripods. So I'm going to be throwing up my tarp, and I'm going to use this tree here and this tree right here. So, you know, these two trees are about 15 foot in distance. So when I go around these trees, I'm not just doing a single line across, I'll be doing two lines at varying heights across between the trees. So I'm going to want a fair amount of cordage. I'm going to take my larger hanks of rope. Potentially I might need a second, depending on if this is enough to go around twice or not. We'll see, but either way, I've got lots of cordage. People that watch previous videos know I'm very cordage heavy. I like to do a lot of ropecraft when I'm out doing my bushcraft stuff. So I'll just kind of set the smaller hank aside and take the largest hank of rope that I have and gear up to go around these trees. So with these hanks of rope, I've got loops tied into the end of them. So for the first tree that I'm going to go around, I'm simply just going to, I'll set my hank down. I'm simply just going to go around the tree with that loop. I'm going to come back to where the line kind of comes around. I'm going to take that loop now, I'll open it up, and I'm going to take my lead line, if you will, and I'm going to hook that through so it forms like a little loop, and the main run is coming off. Kind of pull that tight. I'm going to take a stick, I'm just going to stick it into there, and then pull my lead line so that it's tight. It allows me to cinch onto this tree. Now my thinking really is, I'm only sitting at roughly waist high or so for the first line that's going to go across. Maybe even a little lower. It could easily be down closer to, you know, thigh high. But I'll just kind of run it at this point in time from here. So I'm going to come back around the tree, because really I just want the friction of the cordage against the tree to be what really holds this side tight. And now I'm able to run off to the other tree. I've got some prussics that were built onto the line. I don't really need them for this example, so I'll just kind of move them down and out of the way. Now I'm just going to run across to the other tree. So now when I run across and come to the other tree, I want to keep that line at a parallel height. And like I say, it's only running maybe hip high to thigh high at best. I'll bring it up just a little tiny bit. That looks pretty square. Now I'm going to apply some good tension here, and I want to come around this tree, and I can see that the length of cordage I have isn't going to be enough. So I'm going to have to use that second hank, but I want to make sure this is a good taut line. So I'm going to come around this tree, step under, and just for the quick short term, I'm just going to put a half hitch in there, just to kind of lock it in place so it doesn't give. And because I know my length of cordage isn't enough, I'm going to turn around and put a Marlin spike hitch on this and loop on that second hank of rope that I have, and that way I've got enough cordage to go across between the trees the way I want. So I'll just find a stick. Let me find a half decent stick here, hold on. 2 seconds. Of course. Oh, gotta be weak, right? So the thinking really though is I'm gonna do a Marlin spike hitch, so I'll try to catch this on camera really well. So you're gonna put a loop in the line, you're gonna roll it over onto itself, reach through, kind of open it up, put your stick through, and then just kind of lock it and apply tension. That allows you to, hook a toggle onto your line that's secure and solid. What I've done is I actually shifted that Marlin spike hitch, just so you're aware, I shifted that Marlin spike hitch up closer to the tree because I didn't want to have it sitting where the tarp's going to be laying. So by putting it up closer to the tree, when I hook on the next hank of rope, it'll make it that the toggle isn't out where it's going to interfere with things. Now that little half hitch I put in, all I'm going to do, I'm going to leave this in here because it actually helps keep this lower line good and taut. So I'm just going to slide a stick into there and then pull that tight, and it allows that to kind of be locked into place so the lower line is going to stay secure. Now when it comes to the next hank of rope that I'm going to run now, I'm going to just take the eye of the hank of rope. These are kind of quick release bundles that I've got done up. So I'm going to take the loop or the eye of the rope that I've got there. I'm going to hook that onto that toggle, make sure I'm sitting under the rope, not the stick. And now I'm going to use that to go off and wrap around the tree again. Now with this second hank of rope, instead of being level, I want to come up on probably a good 45-degree angle or so. I want this side to be a foot or two higher than the last line that I set out. So I'm going to come up, just going to hook on there for a temporary. Grab my hanks here. I don't want to be quite that high. So I just came around the tree one time to make sure that it's set at this height fairly solid. Now I want to run from here straight across and back to the other tree that we started on. I'm going to take this now, try to keep it parallel again, within reason. Nothing's ever perfect when you're doing this stuff, but it doesn't need to be. I'm going to come around that tree again, and I want to apply a lot of tension on this one as well. Now I could easily tie off to one of the nubs that's sitting on here, but I'm going to come around, and just as I did the last time, let me just, hold on. Let's just make sure that's good and tight. Try to step over. And under. Set that there for a second. I'm just going to do another half hitch on this side again. Just kind of lock that in place. And I'm going to set a stick into that as well. That should lock things fairly good. And then, just to ensure that that's the case, there's another little nub sticking off the tree. I'm just going to do another half hitch right onto that nub. Just helps ensure that everything's good and taut. I'll just grab a little stick. And set that in the half hitch I've done under that nub. Just to make sure everything's locked down tight. There's multiple lockdown points now. You could get into fancier knots and do this far tighter. I do like going this way just because it's simple for the knots. It allows for a quick release if you want to just pull it and get out of there. And if you've got multiple knots kind of settle on the line, even if one of them fails, the other ones will still hold. Okay, so you can see now with the ridge lines up the way they are, it now creates situation where the line on this side of the tree is probably 1.5 feet, 2 foot higher than the line sitting on that side of the tree, and they're both firm. I've left those prussics on the line from before, and potentially this will become an area I can hang things on later. We'll see. So in my yellow dry bag that you see down at the bottom there, I've got a 10 foot by 13 AquaQuest Defender King camo tarp, and I've got some tent pegs that I've got sitting up in the top area of my bag. So I'm just going to haul those out and get ready to set those up, yeah? Okay, so like I said, this is my AquaQuest 10 foot by 13 foot Defender King camo tarp. I've got a secondary tarp that I have in here I'll be using later on in the video. This is a Rab Sill Tarp 2. I'll just set that aside for right now though. All the extra gear I really need right at this point in time. Alright, so I'll just set that aside. I just want to take my Defender King camo tarp, figure out which way is the long way. And I want to just throw this right over top of both of these ridge lines. And of course I've got it the long way on the ridge line, so I want to go the other way with it. So I'll cut back when I've got this straightened out and show you. So you can see at this point in time, I've simply draped the tarp over top of those ridge lines. You know, nothing complex. I've got it where it's the 10 foot width is here and the 13 foot goes over the top. These 2 points are going to be tied off up and into the trees and become an awning later. And I'll show you the backside and what I plan on doing there. So this is kind of the backside of what the shelter is going to be. So the corner that's here and the corner that's here, I'm just going to be pegging down to the earth and making sure that they're taut between each other. So I just had to go find a stick I could use as a mallet. I know there's all sorts of bushcraft tutorials where people teach you how to make mallets and all that kind of stuff. I find normally it's not worth the bother to do that. Yeah, it looks great on the camera to do all these different skills, but if you're only pounding in a couple tent pegs, if you were doing a base camp where you knew you were going to be there for a while, I'm going to pull that back just a little bit. If you're doing a base camp where you knew you'd be there for a while, it might be worth having a mallet. But I find if you're out and you're only out there for a day or two, there's no sense in putting forth the time and energy into making a mallet to only put a half dozen tent pegs in the ground and then you're done. But I don't know, that's me, right? I just want to move that stone, but that out of the way. On this side, I just want to make sure that this is taut to the other corner I just pegged in. So, you know, you want that to be good and firm and to the ground. Done. We'll move on to the next step. So now if you remember on the lower ridge line, I had a couple prussics there. Let me just grab one of them. I had a couple prussics there that were on that line that I just left from previous hangs. But fortunately enough, the tie out that sits at this point is pretty well right in line with this kind of lower guy line that I have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little Marlin spike hitch into this tie out and use these prussics to pull them out and make sure they apply tension. So I'll try to show that Marlin spike hitch again in close-up detail because it really is a truly handy knot to have. So I just got a couple twigs. I'm just going to set a loop in the line reach through, open it up, pop in the toggle, and then apply tension. It's really just that simple. I now have that tie out connected to a toggle. If I take that prusik loop, I just hook it right over top of that toggle, set it onto the line itself. I can then start to apply tension. I won't apply too much tension until I get the other one hooked on, and then I'll go back and forth applying tension until it all becomes very taut. I'll show that one more time just because, well, I have to do this either way. So I'll slide out that prusik and get it out from under the ridge line there. I'm going to take it, pull a bit more of my line. I'm going to take it, apply a loop, hook onto the main line, and just sit in my toggle. Easily and quickly allows you to have a toggle set onto your tie out, which like I say, then I just hook the prusik right onto that, make sure I'm sitting on the rope, not onto the wood, and start to apply tension now. Now if I go back and forth a couple times and just kind of equally apply tension between both the prusiks, it'll make sure everything becomes firm and tight. So now, as you can see, I've applied tension to the prusiks, and they're fairly taut to the ones that are pegged down to the ground, so it makes kind of a good solid surface on the back. Things will tighten up even more. There's a tree out here and there's a tree over there that the other corners that are kind of on the other side of this setup are going to tie off too. But this kind of creates a good solid back wall, if you will, and you'll see that it'll tighten up even more when I apply tension to the front. So when I shift back over to the front side of the shelter, so I've got these guy lines that I've got tied out onto the tarp. I've got one on that side and one on this side. I normally have multiple guy lines tied off to my tarps at all times, but from one of the previous videos I've done, I did the tie outs and the guy lines to one tie out in. I need to shift those back over to being on the corners again. So I need to do that to both of my guy lines just to make sure they're out where I want them to be. So, and then I'll just show you with one of them. I mean, it's not complex in any way, but so there's just a loop tied into the end of a hank of rope, another one of my standard 6 to 8 foot hanks of rope, where I just looped the loop through the tie out, then fed the tag into the line back through itself. So it makes it really easy to kind of shift and adjust them now. I just simply take the loop, put it on that side, feed the tag end of my line back through, and now I'm set onto that one. And I always like to make sure that the knot of the loop isn't kind of part of the equation. So, and as you can see, I've simply shifted back and now to being on the corner with my guy line. I'll do the same with the other side. So now I already know that these 6 to 8 foot hanks of rope aren't going to be long enough to go up and hook onto the trees and that kind of thing like I want to do. So I've got a couple other hanks of rope I just pulled out of my bag. These will be to go around the tree, and they've already got prusik lines set right on them. So the thinking really is I'll turn around and pre-hook on some Marlin spike hitches right near the end of these guy lines to maximize their length, and just kind of set them in place. And that way I've got toggle points I can hook those prusiks on after I've wrapped around the trees. So I've done that to this side, I'll do that to the other guy line, and then I'll look at hooking onto the trees and then connecting all this together. So, and this is one of the trees that I want to kind of hook onto. Now I want to hook on as high as I possibly can. I want to make sure that my tarp is going to sit up on as high of an angle as possible. So the thinking really is, yeah, once again, I've got this large this large loop sitting in the line. I'm just going to feed my hank of rope directly through that loop, and that way I'm set onto that tree and ensure that the prusik is already free, and the prusik is already sitting right here. So I'm just going to try to nudge this up as far as I possibly can. And then I'll hook the prusik onto the toggle and apply tension. Okay, so I've hooked my guy line up on the tree as far up as I possibly can. Now I'm just going to take that prusik that's sitting on the line. Like I say, it's just a single prusik on the line. I'm going to take that toggle off the guy line for my tarp, and I'm just going to hook those together. Make sure that my prusik loop is sitting on the rope and not on the knot, or sorry, not on the wood. I'm on now. Now all I have to do is apply tension. I'm not going to apply complete tension until I get the other one up, and then I'll go back and forth, equally applying tension until everything becomes taut. So and on this tree, the exact same mindset's going to apply. I've got my anchor rope, so I already got a prusik built right into it, and a large eye, or a large loop that's tied onto it. So I'm just going to set this, because this tree's a bit bigger, I'm just going to set it on a nub so it's easier to kind of walk around. There's a couple prusiks on the line, so I'm just going to slide them with me as I go. That way they're not kind of hooked into the knots. Now I'm just going to feed the tag end of this line through that loop. Make sure everything's cinched on solid. Now I'll jimmy this around to get it as high as I possibly can, just like I did the last one. I won't bother filming all of that. And now I've got my prusik on the line that I'll need. Actually got two on this line. I normally have prusiks on almost all my guy lines, but I've got a prusik that's sitting on this line. I'll do the exact same method with the hook onto the toggle we already hooked onto the guy line coming off the tarp. So let me just put this up higher, start to get all the tension applied, and I'll show you what it's like when things start to firm up. So there is a little trick I want to show too when you're using this configuration. So say you've applied tension on your prusiks and you feel like you've gotten as far as you can, but you still want more tension. You can take the line that's coming off that would just drop down to the ground. If you hook that around the toggle and come back, you can use that to apply leverage, which loosens off this prusik and allows you to slide the prusik even tighter than you normally would be able to achieve just straight off. It's just a little trick to allow you to use the extra leverage to really crank down on that prusik and make sure that it applies a significant amount of pressure to this toggle, and that way your tarp stays really firm and taut. So you can see now I've got the tarp up. It's easily big enough where I can stand directly underneath it. I'm 6 foot tall. You know, given the way I've set it up, it easily gives me enough room to have a headroom. I'll probably end up harvesting some poles. There's on these Aquacrest Defender King Camo tarps, there's little corner pockets where you can put a pole in. So I'll probably push a pole in to drive it up even higher, and that way it's clearly out of my way. When it came to some of these toggles, I had them out further on the line, but brought them in a little closer so I could have drip lines. And that way if there's water that's coming down from the trees and running along these lines, those surplus hanks of rope off the guy lines that came off the tarp, this surplus bit of rope now becomes a drip line, which just helps keep water from getting out so it doesn't get in underneath your tarp shelter. But as you can see, amply big in size. I'll probably end up having my fire right out in front here, and I'll put my bedding back in here. And I've got a different part of the video I want to show for that, but I'm just going to stop and take a break at this point in time, have a bit of water, and then I'll probably go off and harvest a couple poles just to get this to be locked in place up even higher, and then we'll move on to the next part of the video. Yes, I managed to harvest off a couple poles. One of them's still a little bit long. This one seems to be the right length, so I'm just going to use that to help kind of figure out how long I'm going to make the other one. Let's just set my mark. Should be about there. I'm just going to put this piece of wood into what they call a plumber's vise. You never want to be sawing and cutting inside your groin area. You always want to move it to the outside. if you cut a main artery inside here, you could be dead before you get out of the woods. So it's, you know, safe to kind of cut to the outside, safer. So, but by using this kind of plumber's vise, it allows you to lock the wood and keep it good and tight so you can easily saw through it. So it's just a little trick when you're trying to saw through wood when you're out here. Next step on this is the ends that are going to go up into those little pockets on the tarp. I'm just going to break out my pocket knife now, and I want to chamfer the ends off, which is just, I'm going to do kind of a subtle rounding of the ends so there really is no sharp corners. You want to make sure that it's not going to pierce into the wood at all, or into the tarp at all, sorry. So I'm just going to kind of take off any of the potential sharp corners that exist there, round everything off, and then I'll set these poles in place. I'll make that the next scene, yeah? So I thought I'd just add in just a quick shot of the champing. Really all you're doing is turning around, you know, where you sawed it, it would be kind of straight and have a hard edge to it. So you just take a knife and kind of round it a bit, and that way it's more gentle when it pokes in underneath the tarp and just reduces the risk of putting any pierce holes into the tarp. Okay, so I've put the poles in now, and you can see substantially higher now. I've got plenty of room in underneath here. Very open shelter. I know it's a little late in the season to be doing shelters that are this open, but the reason why is when it comes to how I set up my bedding later on, I'll compensate for this openness by how I do my bedding, but that'll be later in the video. But as you can see, these poles work well, you know, give me lots of headroom and that kind of stuff. I've got a large area now that I can work under when it comes to if it really did start raining, because the area I'm in is a rainforest, and quite often there's heavy rains come through this area on and off throughout this season. So, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if I don't see heavy rain later on today. But it gives me a good solid area to work in, as well as have my shelter in underneath. So either way, I'll cut scenes here and move on to the next part of the video. So I'll just do a quick pan around now. And here you can see one of the reasons why I did the offsetting of the cordage on the tree was I wanted to have it that there's a steady slope where if the rain starts to come down heavy, it doesn't hit any pockets where it's going to kind of bind up and have the rain just catch and hold in there. I want the rain to come cleanly off and down this backside. If I really was concerned about winds and those types of things, I could easily turn around and take the tie outs that are along this line and just tent peg them down. But it's not very windy today, and I'm not expecting the winds to pick up that much, so it should be fairly safe in that regard. But that was the primary reason why I did those offset ridge lines, if you will, between the trees, was just so that the water flow would always have a clean way to go. So the area that I'm going to put my bedding down is going to be in this zone right here. But you know, there's some shale stone and that type of stuff I'm going to clear out of here. And in order to help create an insulative barrier on the ground, I'm going to go and harvest some of the fern that are in the area and set down a bed of that in here to give me kind of an insulative layer and get me up off the raw dirt. It just helps keep me warmer later on at night. As we move later into the year, my sleeping bag is still the 3-season one that I'm using. In the next video or two, I'll probably be switching up to my 4-season bag. So I like using the Aegis Max gear. Normally I use the green one, which weighs 1 pound. It's really light, and it works for the better part of the year. But as we get closer to winter, I'll be switching up to using my Aegis Max 2, which just has a lower temperature rating. It weighs a little bit more, has a little bit more in size, not much, but it'll just keep me warmer. But and then I don't have to worry necessarily about the ground stuff quite as much. I mean, I still do, because it's, you know, as the temperature gets colder, but I just don't want to switch up to my winter gear quite yet. There'll be a whole different set of videos that I do with that kind of gear. But so that's my plan. I'm going to go off and harvest a bunch of ferns and just create a bedding of that in here to give me an insulative layer off the ground. So I won't go through the entire harvesting of all of these ferns. It'll take me a few minutes to just kind of go and grab. But normally I don't want to harvest all of them off of where they come out. I only want to take about a half to a third of them and just move from plant to plant harvesting a few off of each plant, and that way you don't do any long-term damage to the plant. Now the ferns are resilient. They can take having a couple of them removed, but if you take too many off of one, you could easily have it just die off and not come back. But the area I'm in has a plethora of these ferns, so I'm not worried about harvesting them at all. So I'm going to grab, like I say, quite a few handfuls of these to kind of give me a layer to get up off the dirt. I'll cut back when the better part of that is set. So you can see I've put my bed of ferns down now. With the climate I'm in, I'm not overly concerned about the temperatures. It's only expected to go down overnight to about 8 to 10 degrees Celsius this evening, so I'm not overly worried about it getting too cold. The sleeping bag I have is amply rated for that. But if you were in a survival situation, and this was truly in an emergency situation you were in, you'd want to harvest way more fern than this. You know, easily build up a bed that's as deep as your knees. When you put your body weight onto it, it'll compress down. But the key is really you want to get an insulative layer between you and the ground. You know, the colder it gets to 0 degrees Celsius, you know, you definitely want to have it that you're not having the earth sucking the heat out of you when you're sleeping. That can really create for a dangerous environment and put you at even larger risk. So, you know, if you're in an emergency, don't be shy, harvest the resources, do what you need to do to survive. You know, I'm only doing this as an example so you can get kind of the mindset of what needs to be done. And in my situation, it's not an emergency, so I don't feel it necessary to harvest the resources unnecessarily. But you know, if you're in a situation where you need to, and don't be fearful of doing it, make sure you get enough where it's going to be insulative and get you up off the cold of the earth. Okay, now for my bedding, I'm going to use this Rab Sill Tarp 2 that I have. I believe it's 8 foot by 10 foot. So the thinking really is, if you're in wet environments and you have a secondary tarp, and I'll just pull it out, and you don't have a bivvy bag, I recommend if you're in wet environments to have a bivvy bag to sleep in. I use it in the wintertime when the rainy season comes, just to ensure that I help stay, you know, dry and that type of stuff. But the thinking really is I'm going to use this 8 by 10 tarp as an improvised bivvy, and that way any dew and moisture, you know, the fog rolls and that kind of stuff, if you're in an open configuration like this, you want to ensure that your bedding stays dry. So by setting up my bedding with this method, it'll ensure that that stays the case. So the thinking really is I'm going to take this tarp, figure out which way is the long way and which way is the wide way, if you will. I want this tarp to be folded in half. And I'm going to take the halfway point and I'm going to peg that to the earth right in the back corner. And I'm going to do that on both sides. And that way this is kind of set into the back of the shelter. So you can see I pegged down the one back corner and I pegged that right back in close to the corner of the tarp. I'm going to do the same on this side. So I just want to get right in there. Take this tie out point, set my tent peg right into it, pull it so it's fairly taut. It doesn't have to be super taut, but set that in place. And that's all sitting right on top of that bed of ferns that we built up earlier. So now what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to peg down these other corners as well and then kind of progress through it so it becomes almost like a bivvy bag. In fact, I'll just use some of, I think I've got other tent pegs in my yellow dry bag if I remember correctly. So I'll just pin this one down. Doesn't have to be super firm. Now, for the better part of it, you want it to go down to the ground. But if it's not right to the earth, it's not a showstopper by any means. Now on this side, I'm going to peg, because this tarp is just folded in half, so I'm going to peg both of these down, both the tie-outs that are the corners. I'm going to peg them both down because I want to just kind of close in this side. And I'm going to do the same with the center tie-out. What this allows now is I can open this up, slide in my sleeping bag, and I've now created a fairly waterproof little cocoon that my sleeping bag can sit inside. So even if the weather turns really poor, either way my sleep system is going to stay dry. And if a bit of rain comes in on the sides, you're not going to notice that. So I'll pull my sleeping bag out of the bag and throw it in there and kind of let you see the bedding setup once it's completed. I've set in the sleeping bag now. The sleeping bag is definitely a lot smaller than the tarp is itself. It allows you to fully cover that and just have it where you can easily just lock down that other corner as well if I wanted to. If it was raining and I wanted to just make sure that there was no moisture getting on my sleep system, this is a good alternative to a bivvy bag. You know, it's flexible in that regard of you can turn around and use it as a tarp if you need to. But I just wanted to kind of show this setup because it makes it that when you're in wet environments, if you have more than one tarp with you, you could easily do this type of thing where it not only helps keep you that little tiny bit warmer because you're inside yet another layer as you're sleeping, but it definitely helps keep the moisture off you. You know, the dew and condensation in the area I'm in, you get heavy fog, all that kind of stuff. You know, this setup helps alleviate all those types of moisture issues. Okay, well that's pretty well the better part of the actual shelter setup. I'll probably end up pulling out my stool now at this point in time and just setting that out somewhere in this area. But as you can see, it's a large shelter. And now not having to worry about moisture onto my sleep system or any of that kind of stuff, you know, really helps kind of increase the comfort level. And having a large area to work in is just fantastic when it comes to doing bushcraft stuff. If you have it where it's raining and stuff and you want to do any projects where you need to be in and dry, this is a good configuration to do these types of things into, you know. But like I say, I'll probably grab my stool, throw that out here. Just debating on how I'm going to set up my fire configuration, but I'll move on to the next part of the video pretty quick here. I had the bag hanging up in a tree that, you know, at the start of the video was behind the shelter, so I just kind of moved that around, and that way everything's more centralized. And I'll put out the stool, that kind of stuff. I'm going to stop and just take a little break here. I might even boil off some water and with the pocket rocket stove, a little butane boil going, just to make myself a coffee and just take a little break. But I probably won't bother recording that. I've shown that in lots of videos. But I'll cut back and show the setting up of the fire area and that kind of stuff is the next part. Yeah. So, and as I mentioned earlier in the video, I'm in a rainforest and I can hear the rain starting to come down now. So I'm just going to actually pop my backpack off the tree and pull this stuff in so that everything's in underneath the tarp. So if you wonder why when I'm cutting scenes that you see everything started to shift and move, the rain's coming. 2 seconds later, I managed to just kind of shift things in and set it down underneath the tarp, and that way everything stays dry. It's one of the good parts about having one of these dry bags. If you got odds and sods laying around, you can just throw them in the dry bag and toss them into the tarp. Even if the dry bag gets a little moisture on it, it doesn't matter, you know. But my bag itself isn't fully waterproof, so I wanted to bring that in. I normally hate setting my bag down on the ground, but I definitely want it to be in out of the rain as much as possible. So I'm just going to kind of camp out and relax for a few minutes and see if the rain starts coming heavy. If it does, I might have to throw in the poncho and adjust how I'm doing things all together here. We'll see how bad it gets. So we've reached the point in the video where I take a break and you guys do the work. If you made it this far in the video and you enjoy this type of content, please like, share, and subscribe. Okay, so I'm just over at this deadfall tree that I'll harvest some of the twigs and branches off to make my fire later. But I want to make a pot hanger, and I found this Y branch which looks pretty prime. Both sides are fairly even in size, so that's kind of what I'm looking for. So I'm going to end up making a cut with my saw here. I'm going to cut this short here, and cut this a little longer here. So I'm going to go make those 3 cuts and take this piece of wood. Okay, so as you can see, I harvested off that piece of wood, cut it at the points that I just mentioned, and now I've cleaned the bark off of that side, and I'll put some notches in here on this side to hang the pot on. So I'll do a close-up of that as I go. Okay, so now on this pot hanger, on this end of the stick right here, I've already kind of started it off, but I'm going to do a notch where it's kind of a bit of a V, if you will. So I started it off just by putting my knife on the 45-degree angles. Sorry I didn't catch that part on camera, but the camera fell over when I was recording, so I know I'm not going to be adding that in the video. But the thinking really is, if you can see how it's kind of got this point that comes up in the middle, I'm just going to deepen that out so it becomes a little hook that I can hang my pot onto. Nothing complex really, but I'm going to definitely bring it in a lot deeper than it is currently. So I've kind of notched it out now. Give you an idea, try to do a close-up of it the best I can. So it does kind of come to a V'd point here, but you can see it's got a nice little deep catch to it. So that gives me the ability to hang my bale handle, my pot, or my grill, or that kind of thing. And that's on the same side as the stick, and that way when it's hanging, the stick could want to kind of lean downward, if you will. But when you have the cut on the inside, it'll pull back and kind of counter that and help keep it all balanced. So not a showstopper by any means, but I just debarked that stick as well. You know, there's potentially bacteria that exist on the bark. So, you know, given that this is going to be in close proximity to my food that I'll be cooking, I just decided I'd debark it, and, you know, it doesn't affect any of the functionality or anything. It still serves its exact purpose as it would, but just makes it more hygienically sound, if you will, when it comes to dealing with food. Sticks that have kind of Y branches on them as such. So I'm going to cut it here, you know, here and here, and then I'm just going to cut a little further down and take a couple branches. I need 2 that have a Y on it, and then I'll cut it on the 45 when I go to cut it down here, just so it can spike into the ground easier. And I need 1 straight one that the diameter is, say, about as thick as the thumb, you know, roughly this diameter. Okay, so I've gone and harvested my sticks. Say I got 2 that have kind of Y sticks on the top, and down on the other end I just cut them to be on a good 45-degree angle. These are going to get spiked into the earth, and that way it's just easier to kind of drive them into the ground. And then I've got another stick that's I don't know, 4 foot, doesn't even need to be quite that long, but 3-4 foot long, and like I say, the diameter's maybe a little bigger than my thumb, about the size of my thumb roughly. So I'm going to use these 3 to set up my cooking zone over top of the fire. Okay, well, I just switched up to my 3rd GoPro battery, so that tells me this video is starting to get on. So I might end up cutting out some of the wood processing side of life, which is fine because people have seen me do that in lots of videos. But I do still, one way or the other, need to clear out my area that I'm going to do the fire in, you know, as a safety. You've heard me talk about this in previous videos if you've watched them. You know, you definitely want to get all the living foliage out of the area that you're going to be burning in. You definitely don't want to have a fire start in the forest by accident. So, you know, just try to clear it back, get back down to the dirt the best you can. Clear out an area where you know this should be a lot safer. You're not going to have leaves and that kind of stuff automatically just go, you know. I'll clear it out a bit wider than this, and then I'll go and set up the actual cook area. So it's not the fanciest area to clear out, but it'll do the job. So I'm going to want to take one of my Y sticks and just start to baton that into the earth. And I'm going to do the same. I'll drive that down further. I'm going to do the same with the other Y stick so that the Y's face to the top. I'll put it, let's say, roughly about there. Maybe even a little bit more room. So I'll drive these a little further into the earth. The thinking really is they're going to have a cross stick sits over top of them, which then supports my pot hanger, which then has either my grill or my pot hanging off of the little hook that we carved in there. So like I say, I'm going to drive these Y sticks a little further into the ground to make sure they're in good and solid, and then we'll move on to getting the fire going pretty quick. So I'll just show it to you now, where, like I say, this pot that I use has a bail handle on it. So it's really simple. I just take my pot hanger, set it on, and just hook my bail handle right on that little hook that we carved out. And that'll work. It'll cook up the water if I need it to, you know, boil some water off. And if I wanted to make it more adjustable, on this pot hanger, how I carved out that one notch, potentially I could put multiple notches and make this longer as a brand new one altogether, but make it longer where I've got a larger adjustability that I could do. But in this specific situation, this should be adequate enough for me to be able to hang my pot on it and boil water in it over the fire. But I normally like to use a grill. So when it comes to the grill, I'll just show you that for a second. Just pop off the pot, put the grill on. So now, because the grill has a hang chain that I use, it's really not effective for using my grill. The grill is almost touching the ground at this point in time. But you don't really need to have pot hangers and that kind of stuff if you're using a grill like I've made, and you can see how to make this in full detail in previous video I put out. But if I just slide the grill, I've got an O-ring on it. If I slide that right onto the stick and just use that to sit over top of the fire, it allows me then to use my grill without having any chain hang or anything, or chain to hang off the tripod or any of that business. But the only thing I don't like about this entire setup, it's easy enough to turn around and move things left and right to get them onto or off the fire, but I don't like how I can't go up and down and back and front. You know, it really takes away from some of the control I get over how I'm cooking over the fire. You know, I show these examples just to show them, and that way if you're ever out in the field you can use them if you need to. But when it comes to my preferred method, it's always the tripod. It tends to be by far the most flexible option. I plan on cooking off my mushrooms and my steak, so I'll be leaving the grill on there, and I'll just make my fire under this grill. But one way or the other, I'll just kind of set it to the side for right now, which is one of the things I do like, is you can kind of move it out of the way, and when you go to set up your fire, it's not a problem. And I'll just leave my grill hanger off to the side here, or my pot hanger, if you will. I'll leave that off to the side. I'll need to boil off some more water later on. My water supply is pretty good right now because I haven't really had much, but I'll go through a fair bit of it, I'm sure, as the evening goes on. But my next step will be kind of getting the fire ready and starting to process that. But I just wanted to show you this kind of cook setup and configuration. Okay, so like I say, I know this video is starting to get long, but there's these dead fallen trees here. I've got lots of small twigs that are smaller than a pencil in size. You know, there's lots of those little branches that are still on here. So I'm going to harvest two different piles. I'm going to harvest one pile that is everything, as you can see, lots of really tiny branches. I'm going to harvest one pile that's everything smaller than a pencil, and one pile that's, you know, these larger sticks. So I'm going to gather up two piles of those and then start to get my fire ready. Okay, so as you can see, I've created a pile of everything that's smaller, pencil size or smaller, and this is a pile that's bigger than a pencil, and I put the smaller sticks up front to kind of ease my way through that. Really, if I spread this out a bit, there's smaller sticks in the front and the diameter increases as I move to the back. Okay, so we got the larger fuel wood together. Sorry, just, you know, getting old. And I've got a few pieces of fat wood that I had in my backpack. I'll use that to help get the fire going. I'll use the back of my knife and just give some shavings off it, and then use that as my kindling to kind of get things going, to light up those smaller twigs, move up to the larger branches, then move into my fuel wood. So the next scene or two, I'll be doing the fire. I might have a scene or two in between here and there, but I'm getting very close now. I just have to stop and breathe for a minute. Getting the fuel wood's always the biggest pile of work. Okay, so a while back, Papa Leather sent me over a little leather valet tray. I'll end up using that now to kind of catch my pile. So the thinking really is just kind of get that tray together. So boys over at Pop-Off Leather, if you watch this video, you'll see your tray's getting good use. It's getting pretty dirty, and you know, life goes on. But like you say, you got my fat wood there. Just going to use my light by fire knife. So I'm just going to set that down and start just using the back of my knife, because it's got a good 90-degree spine on it. Use the back of my knife to kind of create these fine shavings of the fat wood. When it gets to be a half decent pile, I just kind of use the front of the knife to, you know, take it off the main piece. But the thinking really is, this stuff will go up really, really easy. Fat wood is already burns really easily to begin with. It burns almost like a candle. But when you use the back of your knife to create these fine shavings, you're just increasing the surface area, making it all the easier for it to take a spark. So I'll just process this until I get a half decent sized pile. Really, if I was wanting to conserve my resources as much as possible, this would have already been more than enough. But I don't mind just having the fire be easy to get going. And as you can see, hopefully the camera catches that okay. As you can see, easily create a nice little tinder pile. You throw a fair rod spark into that and it'll go quite rapidly. So I'll just build that up either way to be a little bit bigger, and then I'll actually throw the fair rod spark in and get the fire going. Let's get this fire going, shall we? So I put that fat wood down, put up some of the larger sticks in the back. When I go to put this down, it'll just help create a little air pocket for the air to get in. There we go. Well, that was a little finicky, wasn't it? See, now when I set down these fine twigs, it ensures that these larger sticks ensure that the fine twigs don't just lay right down on top of that fat wood. Just so it makes it that it doesn't put it out as easy. There's a lot of moisture in this wood. Like I say, the area I'm in is a rainforest. So half the battle is just drying out the moisture out of the wood to even get it to burn. But I'll just let that sit now and go for a second. As the heat rises up through it, those twigs will start to take as such. Pull over my larger twigs now. I want to get those on fairly early. In fact, I'm just going to pop this off for a second. I want to get these larger sticks onto this fire and drying out as quickly as I possibly can. Like I say, there's a lot of moisture in this wood. There almost always is. It's one of the things I do enjoy about creating fires off the ferro rod in this environment. It's one of the more difficult places in the world, in my perspective, to get a fire going from the ferro rod, because you're in a rainforest, the wood's always moist, it's always difficult to get going. So if you can become proficient at using a fair rod here, if you go down into places like, you know, in the prairies or in the desert where things are drier, the half the battle is already conquered, you know. You can see the gray-white smoke coming out. That's pure moisture coming out of the wood. So normally I would say don't add on wood until you see the flames coming above the top of the wood. But when you're in these types of environments where it's just so wet, you have to add on the wood earlier than you'd normally ideally want to, just to ensure that it dries out. And you'll see the smoke will change. It'll go from being this thick white to become more clear colored as soon as the moisture starts to come out of it. You can hear it hissing and everything. I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but I know my ear definitely is. So I'm not going to mess about with it now. Like I say, I've gone through pretty well all the larger sticks, just put them on early. And then like I say, it'll take another couple minutes before the flame will even push out through the top of this. And that's okay, it has to dry out. So I'm not going to do anything at this point in time, I'll let this sit. This fire should already dry out and grow as it goes. And then I'll cut back when I start cutting food or throwing food onto it and stuff, yeah? So what I'm doing here is I pinch my fingers into a diamond shape, and when you blow through it, it concentrates the air, so it's a lot more efficient than just blowing at the fire. It allows you to kind of constrict the airflow and cause it to direct right into the center of the fire. It just makes, if you don't have bellows to kind of blow into the fire with, this is a way to kind of do that, far more effective than it would be just straight blowing in. So you can see the flame starting to come out above the top of the wood now. It's still going to dry out that wood. Almost all the larger sticks have been stacked almost straight up and down to try to get them to absorb and dry out as quickly as possible, to absorb the heat as much as it can and dry out as quickly as possible. So I'm just going to let that burn for another 2 or 3 minutes. I'm not going to really touch it at all. I'll add in this one last large stick that I have, because this thing will take a bit to dry out as well. I can feel the moisture in it as soon as I even touch it in my hand. And as you can see, I'm setting the wood almost straight up and down. It's got to sit right in that column of heat to try to give it any hope of drying out fast enough. But I'll let this sit and burn for another couple minutes. Not really going to touch it. It's just going to dry out that wood and start to prepare a coal base down to the bottom so I can add on my fuel wood and move up to the next level of the fire. As soon as you're into the fuel wood will start to self-sustain the fire. So I set the camera up about as close as I can to the fire without it, you know, taking any damage or anything. I don't know if you can hear that on the camera. There's the popping of the moisture within the wood. Hopefully the camera's audio picks that up. I don't know if it will or not, but it gives you an idea. When you hear that noise, it really tells you that, yeah, there's a lot of moisture in my wood. I don't know if the camera's getting that all right, but some elk over on the other side. So you can see, I'm going to stop to check out those elk for a minute and just leaving the fire alone, letting it dry out and getting that wood going all on its own accord. It's far stronger now. The flames are well above the wood pile. It's got the heat now to push through, so this will be a self-sustaining fire now as long as I add fuel wood. So hey there, fellow YouTubers. Thanks for tuning in to another one of my bushcraft adventures. I hope you enjoy the setup I did today. You know, a little bit different than the kind of stuff I normally do. But primarily just wanted to show this improv bivvy bag, if you will, of using a tarp to set up as a bivvy bag. You know, if you don't have that kind of gear, all is not lost. You'll still be able to do things. But I'm pretty famished, so I'm going to get my steak on the fire and that kind of stuff pretty quick. But if you enjoy this type of content, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers. So you can see I threw on that large chanterelle and what I call Zealous Mushroom. Just toss them on and kind of slowly ease them into the fire. I don't want the mushrooms to be right on the open flame too much. The meat can take it a little better than the mushrooms can. I just find the mushrooms, the taste just goes in them a little bit if you cook them on the open flame too much. So I like to have them on the outside edge and just let the heat kind of slow roast them. But either way, I'm just going to stop, cook my dinner. I'll throw in another scene or two, but we're pretty well at the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Okay, as you can see, everything's pretty well cooked off now. So I'm just going to nibble back this chanterelle. Just absolutely delicious. And what I call the Zealous. Like I say, I'll get the scientific name one of these times. And it's more fatty than the chanterelle. The chanterelle tastes more meaty, almost like a mild peppery chicken. Whereas the Zealous one, it tastes more like the fat off of a steak. It's got that kind of same texture and flavor to it almost. But either way, I'll see if I got some salt in my backpack and just get this food into me. So, and as you can see, put the pot hanger to use. I'll just let that hang over the fire now while I'm eating my dinner. And I'll warm up some water and get some coffee on the go. And that way, hopefully by the time, I should adjust this really a little bit. But hopefully by the time I get my dinner finished and that kind of stuff, it'll be hot enough for that to be a nice hot coffee for me. So the steak is just delicious. Cooked perfectly, just the way I like it. Medium rare. I shouldn't lie. There's a spot or two that's closer to medium. But you know, it's the nature of cooking over a fire, right? Didn't have quite the same level of control as I do with the tripod with this cook method. It's doable, but not quite as fine control.